my manager at the time told me, he's like, man, you really need to put in the legwork ahead of important meetings to build alignment. And you need to treat those meetings as a rubber stamp. The decision is not actually being discussed in that meeting. The aim of important meetings like that are just like a rubber stamp. Everyone is aligned. We're all rowing in the same direction. And the onus is on you as like the idea champion or the project champion to go and circulate it everywhere and get feedback and get questions and just get everyone aligned and make sure that your idea is ironclad and was moving forward.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Dara, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product growth and senior leadership topics. Welcome to the Product Tea. Today's podcast guest is the head of growth optimization at the company that crossed $1 trillion in GMV. I just almost said Spotify.
I said Spotify, honestly, in my intro interview with the chief growth officer. And I was like, oh my God, that was...
You know what? We are going to leave this intro in so people see how it sometimes goes. He is at Shopify, not Spotify. I'm dyslexic. I apologize. Okay, he is a master at harnessing the synergy between product innovation and data analytics. At Shopify, he leads a dynamic team within the R&D department, focusing on embedding growth through data-driven insights and innovative strategies to enable measured impact. He joined them in December 2020 as a senior lead growth strategy and brought his visionary approach to other real estate companies before that, like Inman News and RealScout. His career journey is full of growth mechanism across various platforms, over 10 years of growth experience, and we are going to talk about all of it. Maybe. Let's dive into impactful business strategies for growth junkies together with Kyle Pursell. Kyle, it's very nice to have you here today.
Thanks so much, Leah.
How would you rate this intro?
I thought it was fantastic. I mean, honestly, that happens quite a bit.
Yeah. It happens all the time to me. It's especially staggering because these two companies have absolutely nothing in common. One of them is a B2B company and the other one is a B2C company. So when I give an example in my cohorts about something and I say accidentally the wrong company, which has happened like 2 or 3 times already because my brain just works this way, probably what I say makes absolutely no sense. But before we talk about this, Kyle, can you introduce yourself to the audience in like 2 to 3 sentences in case I forgot something? Yeah. Who is Kyle? And then we're just going to jump in.
Totally. So at Shopify, I manage a team that embeds on R&D teams. What we do is we look for opportunities within the funnel. So gaps, optimizations that the team is generally not looking for. So product teams oftentimes lean towards like 0 to 1, like building new features, kind of like moving forward. And what our team does is like uses data to identify with a given product funnel, like where are the gaps, like where are the bottlenecks and how can we optimize this for further growth. Outside of work, I live in Austin, Texas. I've been here for 3 years. I have the fever of a convert. I love Texas. I love Austin. I have a kiddo and a wife and all good.
That sounds absolutely amazing. Everything that you just described sounds like purest growth, which I cannot wait to talk about. Austin, Texas, as far as I remember, as a filthy European, is the source of a lot of great musicians.
Oh, yeah.
And I think one of my remote guitar teachers from like 10 years ago, which I cannot remember what his name was anymore, is actually from Austin, Texas. But we're not going to talk about guitars today. So really quickly, the question that I ask everyone, what do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
So I grew up the son of small business owners. My folks had a cafe bakery and I just like worked on the counter, worked as a busboy pretty much for as long as I can remember. And so I've always been like a very personable like fella. But what people miss oftentimes is they mistake me for an extrovert, whereas in fact, like I am a massive introvert. I am a bookworm. I love to just like hold myself up, like, away and just read and be with my thoughts. And so I think that's a common misconception. How about you? Are you come across as a pretty major extrovert? But is that a misread?
I'm absolutely 100% a pretty extreme introvert.
Really?
This is exactly what it is. Yes. So I've been talking about this on the podcast also quite a lot, but just like to add something new to this. I kind of started to learn that why I come across as an extrovert is because when I'm getting interested in a topic, I get super excited. I get genuinely excited, but it's very hard to excite me. So like if we talk about the weather or just like some stuff that just does not like interest me at all, I just shut down. I'm just like, I don't know what to say. I'm getting very uncomfortable. I don't like the silence in between people. I just want to leave. I just want to run away. I do not go to parties. I do not have a lot of friends. I do not like to be in meetings with a lot of people. I like meetings, maybe, like if it's about something interesting, right? Like if it's about data or like we're trying to figure something out, a workshop and so forth. But I am the number one person that always leaves first and always regrets it when she gets invited to parties where I said yes. So I'm actually a massive introvert, but I talk a lot also through my ADHD. I have some kind of energy out there, right? Like, and I also learned how to fake excitement because you have to do that also sometimes in a professional environment, unfortunately. But my heart is really where I am working. And I am very, very like, this is my world, right? But 90% of the time, I love silence and I'm actually home thinking by myself and just doing stuff that introverts do. Yeah.
Nice. Know thyself.
It is what it is. Yeah. You know what? We should do an entire podcast series about introverts because actually most people said the exact same thing. Everybody thinks I'm an extrovert, but actually not.
Just like with topics that you're passionate about or interested in, like you enjoy having the discussion.
Yeah, I 100% do. And I think it's hard for me to fake excitement about professional topics in this regard. And I also learned that it is okay to say that, hey, look, this is just not for me and I got to go. And yeah, anyways. So we're talking about something that makes me a little bit extrovert, let's say that. So, which is growth. And let's just start with this kind of thing of head of growth optimization. One of the reasons why I was super excited to talk about this with you specifically is because I'm also in a GMV business. Now, I said in the introduction that this company has passed $1 trillion in GMV. So what is GMV? For those that are not exactly what is GMV, it's gross merchandise value. It's the amount of money that our customers make. And usually you have a take rate on this. So like this is the overall revenue. It's almost like a payment provider. There's usually very much also payment providers involved in this, of course. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about this? Like you've been with Shopify for a long time. It's a massive operation. And yeah, you are doing growth in an enterprise role. How does that go?
So I wouldn't necessarily say growth in an enterprise role because up until recently, we haven't been very focused on upmarket, like sales-led motions, large businesses, and getting them onto Shopify. It's been mostly focused on kind of the small, like mom and pop businesses, the aspirational merchants, the people who want to, like people who make ceramics or people who, are designing products like crafters that want to sell their goods online. That's what Shopify has historically been like for and still continues to be today. Our motto is make commerce better for everyone, which is something that's beautiful. And I'm like, I get really excited to talk about because it's rare that an individual gets to work in growth for a company that is like unequivocally doing good for the world, which, I believe Shopify is 100%.
Yeah, and I think also to add on this, it's also at a specific size where it's actually also fun to work at because you can take a lot of the guesswork out. It's very fascinating. This is also something that I learned in a GMV business because you are sitting on the side where we do sit. We have some insights in how well our customers are doing because usually they do their entire business over you. Like at least, unless they have a brick and mortar store, of course. But at least for us at Got Photo, like we're facilitating photographers. They run their entire business through us, right? Except maybe like some private photography and so forth. So like they take pictures of hundreds of kids at a school. All of these orders are running through our shops and then are being printed in some lab and so forth. So this allows you to get some very fascinating overview over all of your customers. Can you remember some stuff maybe that was surprising for you or like anything that you would say like was extremely valuable from the insights that you started together when you were allowed to kind of start to pool like and play with this data?
Totally. I think that like one thing that you mentioned about GMV businesses, so like these are essentially platforms where we create a platform for commerce to happen. So people who want to sell goods, people who want to like manage their like photography business end up like choosing a platform to make it easy for them to transact and run their business. And so as that platform, you have a couple of really interesting vectors of growth. One is like in terms of driving more GMV, let's just use it for simplicity's sake. GMV is our goal metric. One way that you can drive more GMV is to bring on more merchants or bring on more photographers for Got Photo, right? It's like you bring more customers to the business is one way to kind of grow GMV. But another way to grow GMV is actually helping those customers, those merchants be successful and have them like increase their own GMV and their own revenue. So working in this kind of a space is so fascinating for growth because you basically get to expand your growth levers. I mean, when I think about growth, I always just go back to like the basic growth levers of pirate metrics, which is acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referrals. And like those are the 5 levers that can get you 90% of the way there as a growth team, whether you're like a small startup or you're a big enterprise company. Those growth levers will generally be showing up no matter where you are. So at Shopify, we have entire teams around each of those specific growth levers. But at like a startup or a small company, when I was at Inman, like we had one team and we would essentially shift focus quarter to quarter between different levers and try to find like, where do we have the most leverage at a given time? Is it acquisition this month? Is it retention? And then the idea is that we would just kind of like have a step function improvement in that lever. And then we'd go off and tackle another lever, always having the ability to like go back. So I think that, growth is not an overcomplicated craft. It's just identifying levers, using data to make decisions, experiment. Yeah, be like incredibly rigorous. It's like scientific like approach to growing a business.
Yeah, like this is the kind of stuff that I always loved about it. And when we talk about growth, we maybe have to also define what it actually is that we're talking about when we talk about growth, because we talk about a very similar form of growth, not entirely, but like very, very similar. So I think one thing that I really appreciate about being in growth is exactly as you said, you can kind of get rid of this uneasy feeling in a lot of aspects where you're just not sure whether what you're doing does something, right? Like it's always based on a feeling and so forth.
Totally. It's like, how do I quantify what I'm doing as a customer success rep or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of it, GMV businesses are so incredibly close to success because usually if our customers make more money, that means also that they're more successful, unless there would be something short term that would be really weird. But I really appreciate this, right? Like it's a very, very thankful or like a grateful metric to work for because it's just so direct. You don't have to guess, right? Like it's not someone pays $10 for your service per month and then you just do not know what they get from it, like B2C products that are about joy and so forth, which joy is fine. We also love that, but higher revenue also gives joy. So let's just maybe really quickly define growth. And then we go back to this particular topic. So on the growth that we were talking about, I think I just prepared a presentation that goes for about 30 minutes about what is growth product management, because I talk really about growth in product management, very specifically, not growth for sales, as sales understand it. It's also not marketing growth.
It's like product-led growth.
Exactly. I did not say growth marketing. That's something else. I talked about marketing doing growth because one of the things that we are talking about is we're trying to sub-segment the journey of the customer before they're getting monetized, before they pick up the phone. And that can be of many different ways, right? Like how do they activate? How do they create a habit? What do they retain? Where do they go? Like, I get it now. That's interesting. That's really fascinating because these things, whether you're doing them self-served or not, you still need to kind of understand in growth what makes the most sense when. This is what we're talking about. We're trying to add initial steps that are leading to other steps, and then we optimize for them. Sorry, I'm just going to pause here because I interrupted you before you wanted to say something.
So I've seen some of your work too, where you talk about, and it's not just product-led growth. It's not just like product teams that are changing the product to help drive like acquisition, activation into your product in a self-serve manner. There's also, I think, did you call it product-led sales or something akin to that, where it's like product can help enable like sales teams to be more effective and more efficient So instead of having a 9-field form, static form, asking people to fill it out and wait to hear back from your sales team, you can actually show like these prospects the product and get them engaged in the product so that when they are, at a point to talk to sales, like that conversation is more organic and is generally going to have a higher like success rate.
So you are working in a very interesting segment because you told me before that you are working now on the more, I think Shopify is trying to go more upmarket, right? So
Yep.
like you try to get the bigger clients, they know already what they're talking about. So we're talking towards a bigger kind of segment in that regard. And the interesting thing is, so let's say we had a product team, and this is what grinds my gear all the time. So you have a product team that is delivering something new. I don't know, let's just say some kind of new feature that we believe these merchants might be finding interesting. Some product managers in 2024 will tell you, well, the good ones will tell you, well, maybe this is going to have this particular impact on the trial to pro conversion rates, right? So like those that are trying it out and then they stick with us, like how they activate and so
Yep.
forth. And while that is fine, that's not what I'm interested in as a CPO. What I want to know is this going better than if we put salespeople on it? And what does it look like if we blend these two? So the question, the thing that you mentioned right now is also product-led sales. When do we stop the self-serve approach? And when do we introduce sales? Because this is in my mind, what product-led sales is about. It's not a linear function because an enterprise client that is really, really big and that exerts specific actions in your product should definitely go into a call with an account executive that is experienced enough that can actually drive this. But most product teams are not capable of making a business case like this because they do not start to understand how other silos are working, how marketing works, how sales works. But you need to understand these before, otherwise you cannot make a case. Otherwise, you're constrained, right? Like, hey, I'm a product manager. So I'm building a product.
Shipping the org, basically. And everyone just stays in their lane and
Don't stay in your lane.
Totally.
That's a good one for, you know what? That is a good one for a t-shirt. Like, don't stay in your lane.
Hey, you could sell it on Shopify.
I may do that. Yeah, Leo's product tee, Shopify.
Honestly, you should have a merch store and you should like set it up on Shopify. I would imagine that you'd sell some really cool merch.
Okay. If this episode is getting 1,000 listeners in the first day, then we're going to do that. Let's go.
Here we go.
Let's do that. So this is what I wanted to talk to you about. So you said that you're now targeting more complex cases, right? Like, which means usually upmarket movements are more complex cases. So how do you now think about this? You have more complex customers. These customers already have some solutions. It's not like they're, we're offline, now we do online business. They're moving from other platforms. How do you think about this in regards to activation or whatever?
Just to be clear, this is a Shopify-wide push where Shopify as a company is moving upmarket. And the growth org is also moving in that direction. But you can see if you listen to our earnings calls, like Harley, our president, is just talking about how much traction we're getting with these like really awesome, big, established brands that are coming onto Shopify. And so in this space, this is really an interesting problem to solve for the growth team, because historically we've been focused on the kind of like aspiring merchants, the SMBs, the folks where we're actually talking directly with the business owner and we're looking to get them onboarded to Shopify and set them up for success with their small business. But now as we look to move up market into a space where like sales has forever kind of like led with a very pure sales motion, it's really interesting to see like how, to your point, can we start to blend and think of like a hybrid solution where it's not entirely sales led. And of course, it's not going to be product led at this point because sales is so established, but figuring out like what is the right blend? How do we find merchants who are signing up and like self-serve that should be connecting with sales? How are we finding merchants who are, initially reaching out to sales that should in fact be, doing it self-serve? Like they don't meet the threshold for our sales team to connect with. And there's just a lot of optimization work to be had in both of those funnels where, it's an exciting time for Shopify. It just seems like I've been at Shopify for 3 years. And in those 3 years, the growth org's goal metric has changed every year. And so it's just like yet another kind of like evolution of like growth in our focus, which is, it's an exciting space to be in, constantly evolving, constantly changing.
Yeah, I can imagine. It sounds like a really interesting challenge. So let's just say we start at the very beginning.
Yep.
So you in growth, you have to kind of know, because you have a mixture of all kinds of companies, down market, up market, mid market, whatever market. So how do you identify, I don't know, let's say your new ICP, for a lack of better word, right? So like this up market ICP. I genuinely do not remember how the onboarding of Shopify was. Maybe it is just like a simple question that you're asking. But GMB businesses have this nasty habit that when they're trying out the product, obviously they're not bringing the entire revenue just right over into the trial, right? So like you need to kind of like, so how do you think about this? How do you identify the people that you're after? Like, oh, this is a bigger account, like in the first place. How do you do that?
Yeah. So I think that there's a couple of challenges with this hybrid kind of business where we work both upmarket and downmarket. Number one, like I mentioned, it's how do you drive efficiencies with those two different funnels to make sure that the right prospects are kind of having the proper experience between sales and self-serve. The other challenge is like, how do you deliver the right experience for a given prospect or a given merchant? So historically, we have done a very much a like solutions-led marketing approach where we talk about Shopify as a platform for upmarket merchants. If you're interested, you can get in touch with us. We will have a conversation, sales conversation. They can set up a kind of like a staging environment if you're, actually looking to move forward, where you can play around with Shopify and figure out like, hey, how this is going. You'll have a merchant success like dedicated rep to help you with the migration. And that's traditionally that's been our funnel. And what we're looking to do now is like, how do we actually start to make it a bit more dynamic? How do we add different elements where it's not just a solution like based marketing approach, but we start to actually show people like additional value of the platform. So in March of this year, we released a total cost of ownership calculator, which basically allows a prospect to enter in their current platform, how much revenue they make. They can, if they'd like, enter their platform fees. But essentially, we take a few inputs and then we're able to project like their total cost of ownership on Shopify versus other platforms. To let the cat out of the bag, Shopify generally has a much lower total cost of ownership because one, we have significantly higher checkout rates than our competitors. And two, I think that our variable like platform fee is actually pretty advantageous for merchants, large merchants. So like that's one thing. Another thing that we're working on is a site speed calculator, because this like speed of your website is super important for SEO, for conversion. And so we're going to be layering on like that site speed calculator. And so we're thinking of how can we come up with different ways to engage an upmarket prospect who might be interested in one specific solution at Shopify, but like how do we continue to kind of like deliver additional value in a sense of, maybe components that they weren't necessarily thinking about at this point to better engage them and drive that conversation.
So there's a lot of interesting things that you just said. And I think on the conceptual side, I don't remember where I heard it first, but I've been running on this for years now in regards to what is the difference between small to medium kind of business to these bigger clients.
Yeah.
And everything is on a spectrum, of course, right? So when we think about enterprises, it starts to become much more about unit economics about everything. And the interesting bit is that you would say that, well, for instance, SEO or search speed or whatever it is becomes much more interesting. So why is this the case? Because usually you would say that for a small business owner, this also obviously matters, right? Like SEO does matter. The difference is that the small business owner does not have an entire department or a guy called Steve who does SEO 100% from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 before he clocks out. So that's one thing, right? So like you have champions for these particular things that are actively working on these stuff, but like it has such an outsized effect. So specifically when I was working at Microsoft, like when we were pushing the search speed down by like 0.1 seconds, this had an incredibly outsized effect, like many times more than a team could bring with feature launches and so
On
forth.
conversion.
Yeah, exactly. So on the conversion, it starts to kind of change. It changes how much ad revenue you'll make. It changes how many people out of a million are just skipping your page and just go out. This does not matter as much as a small business owner because you do not have the quantity to notice that and then also like to leverage it at the same time. So how does this look like now for you in that sense?
So I think that's a really interesting question around like what are the needs of an SMB versus an enterprise like merchant. I don't pretend to know the really like the inherent kind of like needs of enterprise as well as I do the SMB. But I believe that on the enterprise level, the common denominator between enterprise and SMB is individuals or organizations are looking to one, like save time, and two, like get more leverage to make more money. And like that's true both for SMBs and enterprise. Like I was talking to a customer when I was at Real Scout. She was a real estate agent. She's like, it comes down to two things. It's like, one, how do you help me make more money? Two, how do you help me save time? If you can do one of those two things, then I'm interested. If you can do both, like I'm like a forever customer. So I think that it comes down to that. I would imagine that on the enterprise side, it's a bit more about like margins. So you actually have to make sure that like, you're going to net out like in a positive direction where you need fewer engineers, fewer resources to manage your like Shopify instance, and that the trade-off with what you're going to be paying for, the platform fees like nets out in a positive direction. I think one thing that's really interesting about Shopify is that like we have grown with our customers where, generally you think that there's a platform for small businesses. And then once you get to a certain size, you move on to like an Adobe or like a Salesforce, like Commerce Cloud, or you move somewhere else once you like grow out of a particular business. But like with Shopify, we've shown time and time again where we can scale with our merchants. So like, Fiori, I don't know how big Fiori is right now in Europe, but it's taken over the United States and will probably soon be showing up in Europe as well. It's an awesome clothing brand. It's actually out of a small town in North County, San Diego that I grew up in, but they have just been like on a freaking like hockey stick growth trajectory. So they started with Shopify and they're still on Shopify. Allbirds started with Shopify, still on Shopify. Figs, same story. Brooklinen, same story. Like all of our big merchants, most of them actually started with Shopify, which is so cool.
It really, really is cool. And I like that you have this really focused kind of thing.
One thing that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting, it was talking about site speed as a lever. You mentioned like, hey, if you can reduce your like time to first paint by a fraction of a second, like you can actually see an increase in engagement with your site. You can see an increase in conversion. And like that is something that, a well-seasoned growth person will know. But oftentimes like that kind of lever lives within, I would say, engineering or like the dev team most often, where they think of like technical solutions like that, where it's like, hey, if we want to drive an increased conversion rate on our homepage, like how do we do it? Like a marketer will have one idea. Oh, we need to like, adjust our value props, or we need to kind of add more contrast with our CTA, or, et cetera. A designer will have like a different perspective where they want to change the information architecture or et cetera. And a developer will have like a unique approach of like, thinking through it, seeing it through the lens of like, their kind of perspective. And it's actually something that I've always enjoyed doing. I'd love to hear how you do it. But like when you think about like driving growth, is it cross-function? Like, do you bring all of those crafts in like early on into like the ideation like step and then kind of build together? Or is it more like, the product manager, maybe the growth marketer, the growth person is coming up with ideas and then they tap design to mock them up, they tap eng to build it, and that's kind of like it's a bit more sequential and more siloed?
This is a fantastic question. And I think the way that I think about this is always in two stages. So we actually call this also at Got Photo, we call it stage 1 and 2.
Okay.
So stage 1, I expect a one-pager that is standardized, that lets me compare ideas to each other. What does that mean? That means I want to see a problem hypothesis that is relatively short. I want to see an objective that is like a sentence amalgamation of whatever the hypothesis is. So, for instance, we want to make the experience for our small businesses better in general. Then you have some outcome driven key results without numbers, but like we aim to increase the free to trial conversion for customers in this particular region and so forth. So that already informs me, okay, what do they want to do? From this alone, without reading the entire rest, like the data validation and so forth, I already know whether it is roughly aligned with the strategy. Why do I say that? I say that because I usually know as a C-level whether we have a retention problem right now. Do we have too many customer success problems right now? I know roughly where the problems are of the company, so I know whether this fits in. Let's say I'm still interested and I'm saying, okay, sounds good. Then I'm going to read further. I see the increments and so forth. In the validation, if I do not see from the product manager that they have spoken and considered sales, marketing, customer success, customer support, specifically, I have checkboxes. Does this affect this particular silo? Could it affect this particular silo? So I'll give you a very specific example. Let's say we have a new functionality that is coming into the product. You as a product manager do not know how to do keyword research, and you don't have to, but you 100% have to talk to the marketing guys over there on whether this is fitting into our keyword strategy that we have. Hey, can you check how expensive this is? If you had to give a very rough number, what do you think? Is this going to be a major keyword or not? Marketing is really good at this because this is what they do all day, right? Like they try to figure out demand on a specific keyword, and they can also tell you how expensive it is. Same for sales, same for customer success, same for all the other functions. That's the first stage. So I want to see this. And then what we do is we come together as a company where I also want to see responsible silo people. So for instance, someone from marketing, someone from sales and so forth, where we present for about 9 teams, 9 product teams, because then afterwards you have to do another meeting for this, right? So this is a meeting that goes about 4 hours. So the 9 teams, they present for like 20 minutes. Hey, here's our hypothesis. This is what we think about this. Does this make sense that we're going to do this in the next quarter? Here's why we believe we're going to do this. And here's why we believe we do not do the other things. Sales is in this call. Marketing is in this call. And they can object to it. They can challenge it. They can say like, this is a good idea. This is a bad idea. Did you think about this? And so forth. Mm-hmm. So what we do is, this is in stage 2 then afterwards, is we are not only looking into like, hey, what can you do? But I also allow people to be really ambitious. So like if they tell me, hey, Leah, I can lift a lot of money with this, but I need 6 more people, then I want to give them the room to do so. And this is why I do not want to hear numbers first. I just want to hear from them, hey, what are you going to affect? Yep. And if they tell me, well, we're going to affect the free to trial rates, and I ask them, so why do you think about it in this way? Then they say, well, because of this keyword, it's going to drive this much. And then I'm saying like, hey, this sounds so amazing. Why don't you ask for more people? And in stage 2, we're signing this off. It goes into the budget. We have the cross-functional alignment and the resourcing and the staffing is done. That's how I think about it. So to your question, super cross-functional from A to Z.
So at the end of stage 1, when you have that meeting where you invite sales, you invite marketing, you invite engineering, is this the first time that they're hearing about a particular project, like in most cases?
No. If they do, I'm getting seriously mad.
Yeah.
I'm getting seriously mad at product managers who do not talk to functional leaders, at least, in that company. There's just no excuse. I really do not think. And here's the problem. So you might ask yourself, well, why is this product's job to ask for opportunities and this kind of stuff, and also to align and so forth? There's 2 reasons for this. The first one is product is the silo that has to build it. That's the first thing. So there are so many intricacies and so forth. Sometimes you will hear something absolutely amazing for sales that comes from an engineer. For instance, hey, why don't we take this little bit of data and we send it to HubSpot through a flag? Oh, you can do that? I didn't know that. Well, the engineer didn't know about it, right? So you do not know where inspiration is coming from. The second reason is you're the only silo that understands product usage data, that has access to it, and hopefully also can do something with it, except for maybe the data department, like in some kind of ways. But the product teams themselves are the only ones that can do it. Marketing doesn't care. Sales doesn't care. And this is why marketing growth is not the same, because growth with marketing means you usually do not have engineers. So what do? You optimize landing pages. That's all you do. So you're becoming extremely top heavy. And this is why I think that this has to belong to the product organization. So now I answered like 5 different questions that you didn't ask.
So it's so interesting. And I mean, that's one of my mentors and a past manager once told me, like after being part of a meeting that I was leading, this was early on at Shopify. I like went into this decision meeting and like the meeting just went off the rails. Like someone from that, like on that call, I think that they were an engineer, just kind of like wasn't aligned and just took the meeting into a different direction. And my manager at the time told me, he's like, man, you really need to put in the legwork ahead of important meetings to build alignment. And you need to treat those meetings as a rubber stamp. The decision is not actually being discussed in that meeting. The aim of important meetings like that are just like a rubber stamp. Everyone is aligned. We're all rowing in the same direction. And the onus is on you as like the idea champion or the project champion to go and circulate it everywhere and get feedback and get questions and just get everyone aligned and make sure that your idea is ironclad and was moving forward. And that was such a huge shift for me going from like, oh, like small business, Shopify, smaller company, where you can just go into these meetings and you can just like shoot from the hip and hopefully like everyone kind of like we come out of that meeting with like general alignment to being like, no, has to be much more thoughtful. It's really cool. And there's a lot of that.
Yeah, I was aggressively nodding for the people who are listening to this on Spotify, not Shopify, for those who are listening on Spotify, because my PMs that are listening to this, they're going to smile right now. Because one of the things that I say to all of them, or like that I said since February this year at Got Photo when I started, is that if you have an important meeting coming up, I cannot have you be surprised on how it ends. You are going to go and you're going to align yourself with everyone that is important in this particular meeting that could actually make a decision beforehand. I do not want to have any surprises in these meetings. Meetings are not there to inform. That should happen before. They may be there for a challenge and so forth, but exactly as you said, like essentially it's about, hey, like we're working out the final details. Yeah. It's like closing the contract. It's not about talking about the contract. It's about closing the contract. That's what it is.
It's like no surprises.
Yeah. A lot of people are getting themselves into hot water so unnecessarily. Like, do not go into a meeting that is important to you without knowing how it ends. Absolutely not. And I think I'm leading people like this. I'm trying to also tell them all the time. And I don't know. I cannot say more than I agree 150,000%.
And another question that you asked about like, hey, what are some things that you've learned like, in your time at Shopify and growth in general? And one thing that is coming up, especially recently, which is an amazing reminder, is so the highest intent that you will have of someone who's like signing up. So now not thinking about the enterprise kind of like use case, but more so like self-serve. So this is like, product-led growth, like subscription business. The most intent that you're going to find from a merchant or from a user who's signing up is in that first session. Like that is the opportunity to really like push like aggressively to make sure that you're engaging them and you're activating them, because there's a huge drop off between that first session and subsequent sessions. And when you think about that, it just opens the door of like, how far can you go in that first session? How hard do you want to push? And that's where experimentation comes in. But ideally, you want to drive people as far down the funnel as possible in that first session as early as possible. So that's one kind of like really interesting space that we're exploring. And another is on the flip side of that, when customers are at the point where they are canceling your product, like that is where they are at their lowest. Like that session when they're going to like into settings, like looking for manage my subscription, going to cancel, they're saying no to like all of these offers, like, pause your subscription. No, like get a discount. No, like the user is just,
it's too late.
It definitely is too late. That's a good argument, but there's also opportunity. What I've found in letting that like fever kind of cool a bit and trying to like subsequent to that cancellation event, ideally in subscription businesses, when a user cancels, there's still some time before like that cancellation request takes effect. So if you get billed on the 1st and you like look to cancel on the 15th, you have 2 weeks where you're still using, like you still have access to the product. What I've found to be pretty effective is, or really effective actually, this isn't at Shopify, this is, at Inman, was in the couple of weeks that follow someone requesting to cancel, like that's where you need to get really honest again. You need to basically like swallow your pride and go to that customer and be like, hey, I'm sorry that we didn't live up to your expectation for whatever reason. Like, you know, you've decided to cancel, and I want to figure out a way that, you know, we can make this right. And like, if it's price, like we want to like work with you on price until you actually see the value of the product. If there's like other things, like let's figure out a way. Generally it's price, and that's the biggest lever to like bring people back is incentives. But yeah, so like on the front end, like highest intent, that first session, how do you capture the full value of that? On the back end, when people are canceling in that moment of frustration, like don't treat that as like a final kind of like flag in the sand. Like let it cool a little bit and then try to come back with a compromise and get them to re-engage with their initial feeling of why they wanted to sign up for the product in the first place.
I think I agree with that, with the addition that you also made. I'm just also thinking that you should never stand in the way of someone that wants to go, of course. You should still talk to them while there is a cancellation period, if possible, exactly as you said. So, one of my learnings from enterprise sales, I never was indirect enterprise sales, but I was in a lot of sales led companies, just like Shopify, where you just have, you have the contracts that make sense, that you have two different people, doing research on one prospect. And the interesting thing to me was like how emotional this entire process is, because we should never forget there is always someone in the company that is highly affected by this, also on a very emotional level, whether they're going to get promoted or fired or not. Like there's just a lot of writing for someone at this. Also, when you cancel, if it's voluntary churn, so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about here about voluntary churn, someone going not out of business as a business, but like, hey, they want to switch. There has probably been something happening continuously, exactly in the way that you said, and we need to kind of figure out what could it be, and is it happening to other people, and if so, how many of them are affected by this, so we can do something. So even if you cannot win back the customer, I think one of the strongest data sources that you can have in any enterprise and mid-market segment is a solid churn understanding.
Totally.
And that can start from a survey. Why do we have voluntary churn? How much of it is voluntary? Why do they leave? And then you connect it with quantifiable data. The difficult thing with enterprise clients is always that you do not have enough of them to actually verify what you're saying. But I feel like I'm actually going to write an article about this again, like on how to create a good churn survey for enterprise customers, because I feel like this is such an underappreciated thing. It is for GMV businesses. We usually, when the GMV declines drastically, it's usually they are already churning. And at least for us, this is a big problem, right? Like then we're running behind the cart. But there are leading indicators to this. So for instance, there might be some merchants who are not putting up new products online, which in our case would be a very clear indicator, because
Totally.
we don't have evergreens, right? Like we have photographers who are creating jobs who are having photographs of children or sports people and so forth in there and so forth. So if this declines, then the GMV will also decline a couple of months later. So finding out these leading indicators for enterprise churn are massive. And so I'm absolutely with you. I think understanding churn is a magic weapon.
That's it. What you bring up is so, like, I love that topic of when you identify someone as at risk, how do you get them on a course to like become successful with the product? How do you like put them on a power course to actually see, like, to realize the value that they aspired to see when they signed up? Growth, there can definitely be more kind of elements or aspects to growth, but two that I see that show up consistently are one, direct response, right? So this is like, hey, someone lands on your site. How do you get them to click the button to sign up for a free trial? If someone like signs up for the free trial and, you know, they don't continue to whatever's next, maybe it's a paid trial, maybe it's full price, like sending them an email and letting them know, like, hey, did you know that you can keep going for $1? Click this button. Like those are like direct response where it's just like, you're basically, as a user, you're trading off like the potential for the cost. And it's pretty easy as a growth marketer or a growth person to kind of like drive like an advantageous like offer to get people to click that button, to take that action. The second is so much different. And now this is like, the second area is like, how do you actually help people be successful with a product? This is not like, no amount of direct response clicks can help someone actually build a business, be on the right track, and like seeing success with their business. And this is the much harder part of growth, because now you're talking about like not just getting people to take action, you're trying to like shape the way people behave, which is infinitely more challenging than the direct response side, but is ultimately what you need to be successful at as a growth team if you want to fully realize the opportunity of growth. It's like, how do you change the trajectory of a user's success with a product? Not just how do you get them to sign up, or how do you get them to click a button and take an incentive to stick around. It's like, how do you actually help them be successful?
This is such a good point, and I think I have an idea on how I want to tackle this always from a conceptual level. It was about 15 to 20 years ago. I was visiting a talk from someone at Google, and they had this concept about giving value to specific parts of your product. So for instance, let's say you have, I don't know, you have a specific page, and there is on this page, there is a click call sales, and then there's an action to do something else and so forth. And depending on where you led people, you get a different kind of monetary value. So a click on the newsletter subscription is worth, I don't know, 5 cents and so forth. It was a very interesting kind of concept back in the days. And then I was thinking at some point, much, much later in my career, like it came back to me and I was like, why do we not attach a negative money value to a customer's experience that we can measure? So for instance, let's say you have a server outage on the weekend and you know that you had one, and you are 80% sure that this particular customer was affected on it. And it's not about whether they noticed. It's just like whether they're affected, right? Like, because this is usually where people get tricked in their head. They're like, oh, let's not send a communication out. Maybe people did not notice. I know they noticed because their revenue was down, and someone that makes 10,000 transactions on a weekend that has 2,000, they are going to wonder what is going on. So the best thing is a service that is stable. Mm-hmm. The second best thing is a service that is unstable, but you are at least proactive about it. And you say like, hey, sorry, we messed up, like we fucked it up and so forth. But what you also can do is you can measure how many people were actually affected. You can create a cohort out of them, and then you can start to compare them to the other general population. And if someone in that cohort is affected by another outage afterwards within, 3 to 4 months, let's say, whatever, you're going to create a new cohort out of this, right? So like this is now the cohort of like the 2 fuck-ups in a consecutive time and so forth. So what we should do is we should, in some kind of way, group people who have had very negative experiences. It's almost like a negative lead scoring model that is telling you, oh, too many server outages. They gave a negative NPS. Something else happened and so forth. And I do not see why this would not work. I mean, of course, enterprise is always like the data problem, but you can make some very reasonable assumptions and then cross-check afterwards in your churn. Did this happen for these particular customers that did churn? Were they actually affected by a system outage and so forth? And you don't have to overcomplicate it. I think this is definitely possible.
I mean, it goes back to the idea of like, you can't manage what you don't measure. So, I mean, if the company has a problem with server outages or, for whatever reason, like how big of a problem is it? I love that idea of like trying to quantify, like not just how many like transactions like were forgone in that period where the server was out, but like what is the longer term effect of, customers and their retention? Like so interesting.
So this dropped connection thing, right? So like if someone gets a mistake, like an error message and so forth. So you might not be able to send events, of course, to your Snowflake database or however you're measuring your stuff. That might not be true, but you can definitely measure whether a session has been abruptly ended. And then you can make a predictive model, like, was this actually the last click? Because we usually only know when someone has actually clicked, whether someone is still active and so forth. But it is relatively clear. You can actually say, well, if the trading volume of a specific customer is happening majorly in these particular hours and we have an outage, then automatically, you can even automate it, right? Like automatically we should assign a negative number to these people. And then if they are above a specific value and the score is getting too high, someone from customer success should call and say, guys, we're really sorry. It hit you undeniably much. We're just really, really sorry. And we would like to make it right with you. And the thing is not about price, it's also about being heard. Oh, okay, they do actually care about us.
100%. That could even improve the relationship. Like a good interaction like that, where it's like, wow, this company really has my back and they understand how important this business is to me.
I want to double click on this really, really quickly, because this is a thing. Yes, if you mess up, and this is in your professional life, this is from enterprise customers, it doesn't really matter. Like if you mess up and someone is really, really angry at you, instead of deflecting the guilt, deliver the solution as fast as possible as you can. And if you manage to deliver another solution, or a do-over, or you fix whatever you can faster than they expected, you might actually turn the negative thing, all this fear that has been built up, oh my God, what if this happens again, and so forth, into a positive experience, because okay, if something happens, they have my back. And it's the same for B2B brands. So in that case, yeah, I just wanted to say,
ultimately, no response is a response. Like if you have a server outage and the company doesn't say anything about it, like that is a response, that's telling a customer something.
Yeah, and not the good stuff either.
Definitely not.
So, Kyle, we've been going almost an hour, and I wanted to make sure that we do something that you asked me about in the pre-talk very, very specifically, and I really want to do this. So maybe really quickly, before we do the thing about what are our favorite resources and things that we are consuming, which we're going to do. But let's start maybe from one specific angle. You asked me as well, hey, can we talk about how to get into growth?
Yeah.
And for you have been, you're an OG, right? Like you had growth on your job titles when it wasn't very fancy, right? Like the word itself. How do you think about this? Like, how do you think about getting into growth? Let's say someone says like, hey, this is really interesting. Do I need to be a product manager? Do I need to come from marketing? Well, how do you think about this?
Yeah. So just a quick TLDR on my path to growth. I studied accounting. I started off my career as a public accountant for a Big Four accounting firm in the US. And really quickly, I realized that I didn't want to be an accountant. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was in the Silicon Valley and I was like, hey, let's try a startup. So I joined a startup and I started in customer service, which I think is a great on-ramp to product and growth, customer service. So two things there that were just serendipitous for me, but I highly recommend is one, look to work at a small company where you can wear multiple hats and you can do a lot of work and you have opportunity to grow and experience different challenges. And then two, I think customer service is a great launching point. For me, I came from working crazy hours in public accounting. I'd work 7 days a week. I would get into the office at 9 a.m. and would be leaving at midnight during busy season. And what they didn't tell you was oh, busy season isn't just once a year. They'll throw you on 3 busy seasons, back to back. And so I was just burning out. But I started at this startup called Real Scout and started in customer service. And I would spend my days, talking with customers on the phone. But then when the day was over, I stuck around and I figured out what problems should we be solving? Hey, right now we don't have much self-directed guidance in our product. We don't have, feature overlays. We don't have video tutorials. And so I started standing these things up. And so I was just generally interested and started to branch out beyond customer service. And pretty quickly, my role changed to what they called operations, because the sales team was looking to implement Salesforce and they needed someone internally to kind of champion that project, moving from a product called Nutshell to Salesforce. And I jumped at the opportunity. So now I'm in sales, now I'm in ops kind of. And then I went from the board says, hey, we don't have metrics that we're able to track the company beyond just the basic number of subscribers. There's no engagement metrics. There's nothing deeper. So I jumped at that and I'm hey, we need to figure out what are our North Star metrics? What should we be reporting to the board? So building out a key metrics kind of spreadsheet that would feed the board decks, and we started to use as North Stars. And then it's wow, our sales team is just doing all this outbound. What can we do to help drive leads? Okay, now enter kind of demand gen and for the first time ever inside sales and email marketing. And I think that a startup is a unique opportunity for you to do that kind of work. And it wasn't just me. There were 2 other people that were in customer service at Real Scout that ended up in product. So what I didn't touch on, I'm sorry, Leah, I'll wrap this up because I would love to get your perspective, is at its core, customer service is a great opportunity. So the first part was like go beyond your role, like stretch, find opportunities to like do things differently, like find the white space. But specific to customer service, and why I love customer service so much is that you build empathy for the users, and you're on the front lines of finding like what's broken. And then you start to quickly learn like, you know, what do you need to like triage? What's worth making it to product? What do you need to push hard on to get resolved because so many customers are bringing it up versus like what's below the line. And you start to kind of like build product sense and you build like customer empathy. And it's an amazing place to start because it really doesn't require much more than just like a friendly attitude and a smile, basically.
Yeah, you're sitting on the hard end of the churn stick, right? Like you will hear from the problems of the people. It's very, very tough. Like it's sales, right? Like it's just very, very tough job. So the way that I think about this, just to do it really quickly, is that any position that gives you either a learning from the quantitative side or the qualitative side is good. So for instance, let's say we take customer success. What do you learn in customer success? You learn the qualitative side. You learn how to be shouted at. You learn how to not take things personal. You learn how to talk to people, and it's very hard to kind of not feel their emotions. So that's the qualitative side. On the quantitative side, you can come in from marketing. You probably know about conversion metrics, click-through rates, that kind of stuff. You know it's very common that marketing people actually are somewhat strong on data sometimes if they want to move into product or like growth and so forth. So that is not uncommon. Whatever you do fix and work on the other thing that you do not have. So someone that comes from customer success is usually quite weak on quantitative data. Someone that comes from marketing is usually quite weak on the qualitative data. Not always the case and so forth, but this is what I would say. And product managers, like classical product managers in the way that we have way too many, unfortunately, is that they are probably already strong when they're working on front-end products on the qualitative side. And so because like customer success, right? So like they do interviews and so forth, they're usually not as exposed as a customer success person, but to me, it doesn't matter. You don't have a better chance because you're a product manager to become a growth product manager, or whether you're coming from customer success and then you want to learn how to do product management, because both of these things are teachable, but you need to prove that you can connect both, because the qualitative side of any business, in my opinion, gives you the questions to ask, and the quantitative side gives you the verification how important they are to each other. And you cannot do one without the other. It's just, if you do not know which questions to verify, then you usually find those in qualitative interviews. That's how I'm thinking about it. That's just how I think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's getting more and more difficult to like get into some of these like areas? Like nowadays, if you studied marketing in college, are those entry level roles becoming more and more like harder to come by just with like efficiencies and like tooling and AI? Like,
So it's a great question. And I think it always comes to like, how much does AI automate of your job? So the more bullshit you had to do, like the more repeatable things, the more things that can be actually trained in an AI language model, the more your job will be optimized away or be done by less people. Let's put it that way. So for instance, a very good example is a customer support agent, like first level support that has to deal with very, very, very basic questions. The basic questions are usually 80% of your entire call volume, so you can automate those away with a chatbot. It's already happening. We know that it's happening, so there's a lot of layoffs going and so forth. So this is not a specialist role. Now, the interesting question to what you said is that, so what happens to the specialists, marketers, product people, and so forth? I think the same is happening. You need to specialize within the area. So you have to become a growth marketer, or you have to become a marketing specialist on SEO or keywords or whatever you want to do, right? So like you have to specialize in some kind of way to differentiate yourself towards other people, because what we need now is specialists, because all the bullshit, right? So like the annoying stuff is going to get automated better. Content creation as well. It's not enough anymore if you just writing average content, because the language model can already do that. It cannot write exceptional content and new insights. That is true. But for that, you need to be a specialist in this. So you cannot be like a jack of all trades that just does a little bit of marketing and a little bit of product and so forth. So this is what I'm thinking. However, I do think all product roles in the future, including technical PMs, and people will not like hearing this, TPMs, growth PMs, monetization PMs, whatever you want to call them. It doesn't really matter. All product roles need to think like growth product managers in the future, because if you do not know what you build, how that is connected in some kind of way to leading metrics, at least, that are leading to revenue, then you should not be a product manager. I'm really sorry to say this, because if you do not have an impact on the go-to-market motion, if you do not have impact on the retention, if you cannot measure what you do, then you should probably not build it at all. This is not an area where you can afford to just go by feelings. And it's difficult for a lot of people because they do not know how to do this. But I'm actually saying this because everything else an AI can do, like an AI interfaces, AI controlling, all of that kind of stuff. This is going to change a lot of our work, right? Like, it's not just about like, hey, you just make a little interface and then it's going to be a good product. So yeah, that's my hot take for today.
So where's the space for a generalist? Someone who doesn't want to specialize, where do they fit in?
I still think in the innovation space. So I also started in there when we talk about when you do not know what you do. So like before product market fit, this has always been the case. It's like you're finding some kind of solution that has not been present, some kind of problem that has not been touched by technology yet, or some problem that nobody knows actually exists. New categories, for instance. Everybody talks about new categories and so forth. But innovation is by definition extremely hard because it's not obvious. And things are not obvious that are not present in a data set. So I do not think that language models will start to create innovative products that we've never seen before, because at the beginning, there's always this kind of human.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, we have to be really realistic. The biggest leverage that you have in any organization nowadays is not replacing what Kyle is doing on a daily basis, like transcribing customer interviews and so forth. That's not going to work. The biggest friction that we still have in companies is the lack of alignment. People not talking to each other when they should be talking to each other because they do not have the bandwidth to consume all the information that is going around in a company. AI will help, but yeah.
Teams just like going after local maximas based on what the resources they have within their team or their scope versus like reaching across the aisle, like connecting cross-functionally, cross-org, and like building towards a global maxima or something that's a better local maxima. Yes.
Let's take a very specific example. So let's say you have the assignment that, hey, you're the new staff or you're the new principal PM at Shopify, whatever, find some kind of opportunity. And I'm not telling you what you have to do. Does it help you that you are a generalist that knows a little bit about sales, that knows a little bit about marketing, knows a little bit about product? It 100% does, because what you can do as a generalist is you can start to compare things on a strategical level, and then you can start to kind of go to the specialists and figure out like, hey, so what does this now mean? But if you do not know at all how sales works, then you will not know what opportunities lie there. And this is this thing that really pisses me off. How am I supposed to know whether a specific thing that I'm shipping is better sold through sales or through our self-serve motion if we didn't think about it?
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, this feels like a big problem. And like, you know how many times I've built something in my life with my teams and then nobody cared about it? This is why we test things, because we're just really bad in predicting what people actually want, like really, really want to spend money on and then actually use it. So yeah, take it for what you will.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome. I love this conversation. You are freaking...
Yeah, no, it's great. See, this is why we're doing it. And now everybody can listen to it too. So Kyle, I really want to get this in before we're running out of time. So you said we should really talk about something quite personal, which is what is your favorite kind of media in a specific thing? So like, what podcast does Leah listen to? What podcast does Kyle listen to? Let's start with the podcast. Kyle, what is your favorite kind of material and where do you get it from?
So honestly, I don't really listen to business podcasts very much. I use podcasts as an opportunity to like unwind. I spend, my day like working on product, working on growth. And outside of that, I just want to like decompress. So I spend most of my time listening to like life kind of like biohacking type content. So I'm really into Huberman. Weirdly, I've found Theo Vaughn to be like really interesting lately, specifically as one podcast with a clinical psychologist out of the University of Toronto named John Bernanke on like meaning in life. And what I like about Theo is he can be pretty crass, but he's very like, he comes across as very true to himself. And like, he oftentimes like, yeah, he doesn't really have much of an ego. He beats himself up quite a bit, which I appreciate in a host. So that's mine for podcasts, Huberman and Theo Varn, but specifically the one with John Vervaeke.
Yeah, I'm very boring on this one. So I have two or like three. Okay, let's start with three. So the first one is a business podcast. I do love The Science of Scaling because this is a podcast by HubSpot. Like Mark Roberge is running this one. They basically just talk about, hey, yeah, what is the science behind scaling? There's a lot of CROs in there, of course, because he's also a sales guy and so forth. So I always appreciate this particular perspective, how they do think about product-led growth and so forth. Yep. But on the more personal side, I really like Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People. He has some really amazing guests on there. Sometimes just like, like the speechwriter of Obama or like, so like, this is not about being political at all. It's just like, like I sometimes wonder like, how do these particular people with these really weird jobs, how does like, what does that mean, right? Like, what do you do all day, right? Like that kind of stuff. So that's super interesting. And one that I really love is about, there's sometimes these podcasts that have one season and then they're kind of done on a very specific topic. So for instance, the Wall Street Journal had one about the Enron scandal that was running for 6 episodes. Absolutely fantastic. It's called Bad Bets. It's absolutely fascinating how well produced this is. So this is stuff that I really enjoy because to me, this is more like an audiobook almost, right? Like it's like a documentary in kind of short form. So that's on the podcast side. And I think for me, the visual or like the audiovisual medium is extremely important because I don't like to read a lot. I have problems with comprehending written word, but I love listening to it. And on that side, podcasts are great. And also audiobooks. For me, an audiobook that has really changed my life, at least in some ways, is Oliver Berkman, 4,000 Weeks, where I started to understand it's not about optimizing your time management. It's about giving up on it. So you need different kind of methods on this one.
That's honestly something that is the biggest thing that I'm working on right now is like, how do I bring more presence into my life? Because I feel like time can just fly by where I spend time in my head ruminating, thinking about like a problem, but I should be just living in the moment and experiencing like being at the pool with my son, and that's something I'm really trying to figure out. And it sounds like that's connected to 4,000 weeks. Is that like 4,000 weeks is basically how many weeks you have in an average life?
Yeah, exactly. And also how to think about if you, for instance, start like, there's this concept of people trying to get to inbox zero, like they answer really fast and they work down their emails. But what they do is they start to answer so fast that they create more emails coming in afterwards because they're answering really fast. So you're not really helping yourself being present by just working faster. That's not what this is about. So really, really like that book. Highly recommend it too. And yeah, so what will be your suggestion for a book before we conclude this particular podcast?
Oh my gosh, 2. One is Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It's about Abraham Lincoln. It's fantastic. Yeah, it covers like the kind of his background and then the election and his presidency and just how incredible he was at bringing together his adversaries and his enemies into his cabinet and like working to drive like a much better outcome than just building like, his cabinet based on like folks who are yes people. And then the other book that I just finished is called Nuclear War, a Scenario. It's freaking crazy. It's by an author named Annie Jacobson. And it goes like pretty much second by second for 36 hours. Or actually, is it 36 hours? I forget how long it is. But basically, the end result is like total annihilation for the entire world. And like she does incredible research to understand like, a pretty realistic scenario of what nuclear war would actually look like if it happened.
Okay, that's very uplifting. That's a very uplifting way to end an episode like this.
Yeah, I listened to it like it was 10 hours of listening. It was a pretty dark weekend, but I came out of it being like, all right, now I know a lot more about that scenario. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. I totally get it. I read a book about like what happens if water becomes not accessible anymore. And it was very, very fascinating because it dealt with kind of scenarios, like that I was not knowing about and so forth. And I'm like really like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I never thought about it this way. So I totally get it to kind of just brace yourself into this kind of thing. Okay, Kyle, this was an amazing 1 hour and 17 minutes. We've been going for a very long time. Should people get in contact with you? And if so, where should they do that?
Yeah, honestly, find me on LinkedIn. I've done away with like Instagram and Twitter and all the other social media platforms. So LinkedIn is the best way. Kyle D. Pursell.
Kyle D. Pursell. It will be in the show notes. And thank you so much for this conversation. I hope it was not our last one. And yeah, that's the end of this episode.
Thank you so much.
Bad room. Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now at Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.